What's up, folks? Nate here at Tool Dyno Works. I'm back on the dyno again today with our Street 77765, and we're doing even more exhaust system testing, but this time we're not talking about a full system. One of our customers went ahead and sent us this Austin Racing slip-on that actually just clamps directly onto the stock header if you're willing to cut it. Now, on pretty much any other bike, if you ask me my opinion on the cut and clamp exhaust systems, so really a slip-on that isn't removable from the factory, just like these aren't on the new 24 Plus bikes, where you have to literally cut the pipe off somewhere on the OEM system and then clamp on another one, I usually say, hey, it's probably not a good idea. You don't get rid of a lot of the restriction in the OEM header. It looks kind of ghetto. The fitment's always kind of questionable. But the performance improvements on doing this with the 24 Plus 765 header are so huge that it's really hard to argue against the raw results. And honestly, with the instructions that Austin Racing sends you and sort of the natural weld here that is on the pipe that you can cut up against, it's pretty darn straightforward to do, and ultimately it actually looks decently clean. But before we dive into the specific performance improvements that the Austin Racing slip-on provides, just in case you're watching this and haven't seen our previous videos, we will quickly recap the bike in bone stock trim and then stock with our custom tuning in place, and then with the modifications we currently have on our bike, so we can actually compare it to something and you have a good frame of reference for the gains that you're getting for your money. So real quickly, let's just run through this. The red lines that you see there are the bike in 100% bone stock trim once we are done breaking it in on our dyno. It makes about 118.6 horsepower and about 55.7 pound-feet of torque to the tire on standard, just good old-fashioned pump gas. The blue line is with no physical changes made to the bike whatsoever, with our custom tuning in place. Power comes up at the peak about 4 horsepower, you're gaining about 2 pound-feet of torque, and you just make more power and torque throughout the entirety of the rev range, and the bike runs massively smoother and stronger than it ever did previously with the dogshit OEM tuning in place. Now on our bike that I've got behind me right now, we have the stock velocity stack still installed, so that hasn't been changed whatsoever. But we do have the free intake tube modification that I made a completely separate video showing you guys how to do, because it's literally free horsepower and torque. So that is the only modification we've made to the intake on this bike as it sits right now, is just that carved out intake tube and then this Austin Racing slip-on. And here's what you get for that. The green line is as the bike sits right now on our dyno. It's making over 128 horsepower and 60.5 pound-feet of torque to the tire on pump gas with our tuning in place and optimized for the new airflow characteristics that those modifications provide. You are gaining everywhere after 4,000 RPM. As we've discussed in prior videos, when you have those really large diameter mid pipes, you do lose a little bit here off the bottom. They just don't run super well below 4,000 RPM. However, after that, it is nothing but gains, and very substantial gains. 128 and 60.6 honestly surprised me for literally just a cut and clamp slip-on, a free intake tube modification, and tuning. That is an absolutely enormous performance improvement and a much more linear power curve. In fact, we've shown you guys plenty of full systems that don't perform anywhere near that well because they have screwed up header designs or stupid loops in the pipe or dumb mid pipes or whatever. But the stock header on the 24 Plus bikes is so good and the mid pipe on it is so large that once you get rid of the muffler, it flows really damn well. Now, it is really important for us to talk about here that those performance improvements are only possible to that level when modifying the OEM exhaust on the 24 Plus 765s. The OEM header is different on the earlier generation models, regardless of the fact that some of them may still have the crossover tube in place. The diameter back here on the 24 Plus OEM header, or exhaust system, because it's all one piece from the factory, is significantly larger than the prior generations. The only reason Austin Racing is able to use a pipe this wide in diameter, which is, again, a critical design element that we've discussed many times before in creating the most power and torque with these systems, is because this thing is so physically wide just after the catalytic converter where you have to cut it. On the prior generation systems, again, even those with the crossover tubes in place, this is significantly smaller where the muffler clamps to the catalytic converter and header assembly from the factory. So if you're expecting to be able to use the older generation head pipes with a slip-on like this and get those results that we just showed you, where you're talking about over 128 horsepower and 60 pound-feet of torque, it ain't gonna happen. And that's why, when you go to their website, they only list that latest generation. Yeah, it says 23, but Europe got the newest generation a year before we did here in North America. So, again, can't stress this enough. If you're going to do this, you got to do it on the stock header. You cannot use one of the older generation ones and expect the same results. Now, a lot of people have been honestly kind of whining at me in social media comments and asking me, begging me, yelling at me, all of the above, to show the prior generation header again, because they were so upset by the very first video we ever posted on these bikes with the race fit system and how terribly it performed because it had a header without the crossover tubes on it, that yeah, I'll get around to doing it eventually. But honestly, this interested me more when I noticed how much larger the diameter was on the newer generation header design, and I knew it was going to make more power. So I'll get to doing the older headers still at some point, but again, it's way down toward the bottom of a list of a lot of different systems I still want to look at on these bikes. Now, I started out this video by saying that these cut and clamp style exhaust systems on most applications are not something I usually recommend. I don't generally like them. But the outright power and torque figures on this bike are so good that it really is hard to argue against somebody wanting to do this if they can live with the noise that these very, very short systems create. Let's compare it to the full Leo Vince exhaust system, which is the red lines there, with that same intake tube modification and our tuning in place. Yes, with the longer systems, you do make more power right off the bottom below like 4,000, 4,500 RPM, because, well, there's just no exhaust pressure down here to get anything flowing whatsoever with those very, very short and open systems. But the green line there is the Austin Racing slip-on. And it does make noticeably more power because of how short and open it is, right there between like 8,000 and 9,500 RPM. That's a pretty decent torque jump, and that's quite a bit of ponies. And at the very top end, yeah, the Leo Vince does still make more, makes about 2 horsepower more, but this is a much bigger gain here through the mid-range than that difference at the top end, and a lot of folks are going to be spending much more of their time riding the bike in this area than all the way out here. Now, again, for me personally, doing a lot of track days, I want that peak power when I'm going down a straightaway. But for a lot of you that are not focusing on building these for just some kind of race or track day use, well, this is pretty hard to ignore, because that's oftentimes where you're going to be riding the bike the most. And the one thing I don't usually talk about is the exhaust smell. Let's face it, whenever you put a full system on any internal combustion engine, I don't care if it's a car, motorcycle, whatever it is, without a cat, they do kind of stink. You're going to smell some sort of unburnt exhaust gases, no matter what you do, to some degree. But because the catalytic converter is still in place on this head pipe, it doesn't really smell at all. So again, if you've got a sensitive nose or something, it's just another point in the book here for the Austin Racing cut and clamp slip-ons, because you're still retaining the cat. So if you've been thinking about getting one of these Austin Racing slip-ons or a system like it that will cut and clamp onto the stock 24 Plus header, my professional opinion, go for it. Yeah, you absolutely need to get proper tuning in place. There's portions of the mapping here where I'm way north of an additional 15% over stock for how much more power it makes in terms of percentage of fuel I have had to add. But it works really damn well. If you like the loud sound, it sounds real loud. It's a pretty aggressive noise. And you don't have to deal with the exhaust fumes because the cat's still in there. And when you do the free intake tube modification, as I've just shown you, it performs just as well, if not better, than a lot of other full systems out there on the market anyway. So, that's all I've got time for today, folks. As always, I can guarantee you're not going to find higher quality intake and exhaust specific tuning for your 24 Plus 765 RS or Moto 2 anywhere else on the planet than right here at Two Wheel Dyno Works, because nobody else has even come close to going through the level of intake and exhaust specific testing and tuning that we have on these bikes. And if you do have any questions about intake modifications, exhaust systems tuning, whatever it is, do not hesitate to email us at support@twowheeldynoworks.com. I'm still the guy that personally answers any and all tech support questions every single day we're open here at the shop, and both myself and my staff are always truly happy to help.